Hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Monster Hunter Wilds. Alright, so let's just start strong, come out swinging. So far, this is the best game that I've played this year. It's in top spot, I'm putting it at 100% in my ranking system, but by a country mile, this is pretty fantastic across the board, whether it is from mainstream normie on-ramping and appeal, like this is the best first Monster Hunter ever, so if you haven't played it, this is a great place to start. But even, gameplay tweaking and adding and building upon Monster Hunter World, there's plenty of that in here, but just generally speaking, across the board, there will be a playstyle in here for you, and if you're a real hardcore sweat, all that stuff's there, but if you're someone that's kind of standoffish and intimidated, and you're a bit more of a, sit at home, play PlayStation AAA launch titles maybe once or twice a year, this game is trying to target you. It's trying to get you involved. You should consider giving it the time of day. So yeah, quickly on the review structure, I'm doing an experiment this year. I'm reviewing 100 games over the course of the year and ultimately just scoring them from 1 to 100 in a ranking style. The list is filling out. Bear with me, it will bear fruit. Like I said, this goes at the top at 100%. I'm going to do a quick change because I reviewed 2 games out of season, which were Death Stranding and A Way Out. I'm taking them out of the rankings for now, at least. I feel like while Death Stranding was a brilliant 10 out of 10 type game, I don't really want it trotting on the toes of this year, and in this case, specifically Monster Hunter Wilds, I think it's the best game so far, and we should let it have its day. Below it is Tales of Iron 2, and just below that is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Both excellent games. You could probably switch them. They're neck and neck, but they're still niche. They're still indie. Even though Kingdom Come has pretty wide appeal, it's still a hardcore survival RPG that some people are going to bounce off. Not that this necessarily needs to be a pissing contest, but like I said, the appeal for this game across all audiences and all levels of, normie to hardcore is there. Okay, so that's where we're at. Also, I will point out, even though, like I said, I've put in a lot of time with Monster Hunter Worlds, I played a bit of Monster Hunter Rise, which was the, console port one from Switch. And I actually quite enjoyed the Monster Hunter story games, the little Pokemon-esque games. I like them too. Even with all this under my belt, I would still consider myself an absolute casual normie when it comes to Monster Hunter. If you're looking for some hardcore guide, no-life thing, and I say that with love, that's cool. I'm glad for people that have one game and that's all they play. That's not me. I'm just going to talk about my time with it. For those not across it, when I do these videos, I basically will play it until I clock it or I hit the 18-hour mark because that's the average amount of time it takes to clock a game. In this case, I played it 18 hours, though I had credits roll around about 16 or 17 hours. I got distracted along the way for a few hours on the way up, but you could probably mainline the story pretty straightforward in a dozen hours, something like that. And then arguably the real game begins after that. So they're my credentials for, transparency and honesty. 18 hours at the time of this recording, many more to follow as I actually get into the more hardcore, real game, the end game that's the core of the game, basically. So we're going to focus up on a few parts, right? Talking about the story and the narrative is going to be kind of big. There's been a lot of changes in what I would call the graphical. I use the word fidelity a lot, but that's not really what applies here. But we'll talk about graphics and that as well, and a bit about gameplay changes. Actually, let's start there because that might be the smallest section. We'll break down what Monster Hunter is mechanically and get that out of the road. So broadly, in a gameplay setting, you move around these kind of instanced open world areas, and there'll be multiple of them over the course of the game. And within them, they'll have sort of a native monster population. It'll be maybe like 3 monsters moving around, and they come and they go and they rotate around, and sometimes they biff with each other. So there's this sort of dynamism, albeit a fairly basic one, to the environment. And then there's lesser monsters, and then there's all sorts of like mining outcrops and plants that you can farm. So there is this kind of ecosystem with a bit of dynamism to it that you can cruise around and hunt in. And honestly, you don't do that much outside of your specific task, because your motivation is that in order to craft better weapons and armor, you kind of have to kill and harvest the parts, the skin, the tails and bits and pieces, claws off of these monsters to then build out sets and upgrade them and build more. And, it has that sort of delicious feedback loop of you complete a set to make yourself stronger, then you take on the next strength level of monster and rinse and repeat, make his set and that sort of thing. And it's addicting and it's brilliant, right? That's pretty much how the game goes. As far as picking out what you wear as armor sets, again, until you get into the really late game where it starts to be that you're just going to get carted or rather you're just going to die non-stop and you have to actually really think about your resistances and all that. For the most part, it's kind of like just numbers go up, numbers get bigger, ladies' choice, kind of bit of a fashion police kind of thing. But again, I don't even necessarily want to talk about it other than to let you know that there is a much more hardcore, grindy end game that will challenge you. It's there, but I haven't even come up against it yet. Weapons-wise, you essentially have to pick, well, now this will test me. I think there's 16 types of weapons now. And look, it's part and parcel of your baby's first Monster Hunter to play with them all and keep changing and that sort of thing. You'll eventually settle on something, but know that they have radically different play styles. It's actually quite wild. One of my mates I was playing with a bit, I can't remember what he uses, dual swords or some crap like that, but his philosophy is numbers big, number go bigger. Again, personally, I haven't really spent much time with anything other than my main, which is the hunting horn. I'm a doot boy, which is kind of a meme item when then you realize it's actually really complex and it has its own nuance. And what I might do is I'll just explain to you how it works from the hunting horn perspective, and then you can imagine that there are other weapons in this game as complex, perhaps more complex and more simple, and they have wildly different playstyles, from the heavy bowgun, which is sort of like an MG42 that you walk around and crab walk with, but a lot of that's about ammunition management and crafting, so it sort of has a meta back end to how you play that weapon, to even things like there's like a lance and a shield, not to be confused with the gun lance, that's a different weapon again, but the lance shield I played a lot of it with World, and that's very, counter. It's about learning the move sets very specifically from the enemy and being able to leverage countering their hits at the right window, just to name a few. So the hunting horn is kind of a support weapon, and there's so many different weapons within the category, and you're going to build them all because, there will be different elemental strengths, lightning buffs, that sort of thing. It can be as simple as that, or bigger numbers. So there will be a right tool for the job, especially when you're getting into endgame and you're coming up against harder monsters. But like from the perspective of the hunting horn, it has kind of spells, these sort of combinations between your three main attack buttons, which will be like triangle, circle, and pushing them together. And so you'll have this spell list and a stave, and you basically hit your enemy with these combos, and you lock them in and you pull right trigger to play the song that you put in, which is up to like 4 notes long. There's sort of weapon specific special music that will get locked in. So like if you queue up the notes, but maybe you get knocked over or you mess up the combination afterwards or whatever, it's still locked in forever until you use it. There are encore mechanics. So you might have like an attack strength up buff. And if you play that once, you'll get the yellow version, which is light. But if you play it again, you get the purple version, which is the super version, and it can, and it bonuses everyone around you. So maybe you queue that up in your horn repertoire, but then you play an encore on top of playing it, and all of this you can get knocked out of if you're not careful, so you've got to watch the moves on the enemy. They've also added a whole bunch of stuff in. There's these sort of bubbles you can put on the ground, these performance area of effects that if your team stands in them, they'll get various bonuses. It depends on the horn. Some will be attack speed or something, and others will be defense up. And then there's even, like a mini thing within that. So when you're casting the bubble, you get this window where you can spam buttons really fast. And at first I thought that was a bit of a meme, kind of like strumming on your guitar and shredding. But then I realized if you really know that particular horn well, you can learn the combos to maybe the specific best weapons, and if you're really fast about it, you can go boom, 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 and slam it in on muscle memory. So it sort of makes you almost animation skip and save 10 seconds casting it. Likewise, there's this wound system now. Not all weapons have it. I was talking to my mate. He didn't understand it. He didn't see it. And I tried the heavy bowgun out because I have a soft spot for that. That had the wound system as well, but essentially, you can put wounds on an enemy, and then if you use the aiming mode with your weapon, you can then hit said wound, and it does the same thing. It will cash out the wound. It'll go wound destroyed, and you'll get a special bonus bit of gear or, hide or leather or whatever from destroying that wound. But in the Hunting Horn's case, you'll get that window again to smash in a quick combo. Maybe all of this is flying over your head and it seems very complicated. It is. It's a complicated weapon. I absolutely love it to death. But that just sort of illustrates that a lot of what I explained then was already in it. But even things like the bubbles and the wounds and the speed timing, that's all new from what I understand. And I'm assuming they've done the same thing with a lot of the other weapons, updated them, changed them. So it's more Monster Hunter, but a bit of a twist, bit of a nip twist, bit more added. While I'm also just on gameplay, there's been a lot of more normie-friendly stuff added, which to me is a huge welcome because it is a game that has menus within menus. It's very fiddly. The thing is, your muscle memory and your familiarity will come over time, but the problem with that sort of complexity is it is a barrier, right? And the more of these barriers you have, the more likelihood that you're going to bump new players back and push them away. Some of the coolest stuff is they've introduced mounts, which I don't believe was in this, and I want to get my wires crossed. In Monster Hunter Stories, you could ride mounts, but that was a totally different game. Anyway, regardless, you can drive a bloody horse, car, bird thing. And as long as you've got a target to go to, you can press D-pad up and you can just autopilot. You can get it to go. And you can piss fart around in your inventory. You can sharpen your weapon with your whetstone while you're still on its back. You now have a secondary sort of holster slot so you can take a second weapon. In my case, it's just 2 different horns with 2 different sets of spells. And so all you got to do is press D-pad right to change it out. When you take on a contract, you'll be given sort of like gift items, and you can do D-pad left while you're on horseback to sort of claim them into your shortcuts in your inventory. The radial system is so good. Like I already had muscle memory for the SOS, which is hold bumper, right stick down, pop the SOS flare, which means you open your lobby up to multiplayer to join. Instead now, I mean, that's still there, but you can put auto SOS on. So as soon as the window opens, you basically send out a flare. And if you have friends that are linked together through clans and all that sort of stuff, they will get the invite immediately as well. So it's very friendly, albeit multiplayer is a bit silly in the early going, much like Monster Hunter World. I know I'm crossing over into campaign briefly, but if you haven't played a campaign mission, you can't join a dude halfway through a campaign mission. And inconveniences as that sounds, it makes sense. You're going to spoil the game for yourself as well. So generally the smart course of action is to get through that campaign and then worry about multiplayer. And as you know, and the developers seem acutely aware of that as well. The campaign's not difficult. As long as you're just crafting with whatever you pick up along the way and go, you're only going to get carted a couple of times here and there. You don't really need to grind off to the side. It's pretty much an elongated tutorial, but I loved every second of it. But yeah, so now you've got the auto flare, and on top of that, you've got like AI bot party members that will backfill your squad and they'll get replaced by new people. So like if you're having multiplayer issues because it is a launch window and maybe people aren't joining, well, you're going to get bots joining and then there'll be a whole bunch of you getting that party feeling. And from a hunting horde perspective, that's particularly rewarding because your buffs are a lot better if you have people in the party with you. So again, a lot of quality of life there. Before I leave that radial, like left and right on the radial, use the appropriate healing or ailment item at that time. And that is so inspired because let's say you've got 5 different healing potions of different strength in your pocket and maybe you've only got 1/8 of your health bar missing. If you do that, radial thumbstick left, it will auto grab the right potion for the right amount to minimize waste. Same as maybe you're on fire, maybe you're poisoned, something like that. Maybe you're falling asleep or paralyzed. Go D-pad right, it will just apply the correct thing if you have it in your inventory. It's fantastic. I love it. It made a game that is cumbersome necessarily much more accessible and streamlined. So look, they're my main takeaways from a gameplay perspective. And that was kind of the small section. Let's jump over to the campaign. So across the board, this game is actually kind of scaled back. And I don't really know what the public perception was going into this. Funnily enough, I didn't watch any trailers. I didn't know anything about this game going in. I just knew I was going to play it. Like, to me personally, I just have too busy a life, honestly. as soon as I know that I'm going to play a game, I kind of just put it in the black box and I'll play it when I get to it, right? Maybe, I suppose that's the blessing of me playing games nonstop all the time. Don't really have time to be super hyped. So I didn't even know that this was like set in a desert, but that's kind of where it opens. You're in this sort of sand ship skiffing along, which is wild. And you're part of this kind of small expedition. It's way scaled back compared to Worlds. That's the main touchstone for me and for most. That felt like a D-Day landing of people going to sort of an America's New World, expedition is almost an understatement, especially when you compare it to this. The setup and premise for this is some kid has wandered out of the bloody, this wasteland, the uncharted lands, the forbidden lands, whatever it's bloody called, right? Some generic name. They don't think people are out there. The guild has found this kid and they're like, well, let's send a little mini expedition out there to explore, looking into reports about some sort of extinct monster, whatever. It's a carrot on a stick. It doesn't matter. But the point is, it's just a nominal force. It's much more scaled back. And that is a huge theme to how this whole game works. So structurally, as the story goes on, it is very much a journey through different biomes and what have you, and essentially trying to get this kid back to his village and get to the bottom of this mystery, which I don't want to talk too much about. Funnily enough, the core story isn't that big a deal. It is very much the trappings, the framings, the peripheral characters, the kind of intimate nature of it all, and the journey, I would say. And here's the thing, and once I say it, you're not going to be able to put the cork back in the bottle. I don't know if I'd call this spoiler, but I started figuring this out. I started seeing it, and then I really started to see the overt, almost references. I don't know. It's not plagiarism or anything like that, but I'll just say it. This game very closely follows the structure of The Fellowship of the Ring, which I don't think is a bad thing. It's my favorite of the three movies. I think it's the strongest. People will try and get in punching matches with me about this all the time because they like counting how many orcs you've killed and blown up Helm's Deep and all that sort of crap. That's cool, but I always found the journey and, again, not to overuse the term, the intimate nature of the Fellowship themselves so very much the strongest part of the trilogy. And so this game has very clearly taken inspiration from that to the point where there are some actual standout moments. Without getting into spoilers, there's a get hooked down into a cavern on your own kind of Balrog-ish vibe. You do manage to get to a sort of Eye of the Storm kind of city, and it is very, oh God, what's the elf name? Lothlorien or whatever? With a female elder that kind of looks like an aged up granny version of Cate Blanchett going for a graceful knowledge, to the point where they even have a bit of a I will take the ring in kind of young main protagonist kid with the MacGuffin at a sort of council meeting. So look, there's heavy inspiration there, but it still does its own thing. And in a way, it's sort of like, if it's not broke, why would you fix it? Like, it's a great system to ape on. And through it, I had a brilliant time, and I really enjoyed the entire campaign and story for what it was. Even if, like I said, the core theme wasn't necessarily that strong, it was the friends you made along the way. Which, I mean, it's even more hilarious when you realize there's 2 units, and each unit has 4 characters to them, so that's 8 characters, and then you have the kid that they're trying to get to the location, so that's 9 members. Anyway, look, I think if you really want a conspiracy and look deep enough, you're going to find Lord of the Rings stuff in here. I wonder if anyone else has noticed it. But that's the structure. You're part of bloody Avon unit or something like that. That's definitely not what it's called, but that's better. You make your own character. I made an oblong, caveman-headed dude that looked a lot like Ron Perlman. But then when I realized how good this game was in motion, all the cutscenes have your character in them, which is wild. I don't know what they're doing with the RE engine these days, but it's insane that this is the same engine and it's gone from strength to strength. I shouldn't be surprised, actually, because this made me think. It flicked a switch in my head, and this will be interesting if anyone remembers this. Do you remember Deep Down? Look it up, because this game made me look it up. I was like, Deep Down, I remember that. What happened to that? Turns out that was Capcom. It was this medieval dungeon crawling, knights in armor versing dragons. It was like a pre-alpha test reel of a new engine they were working on. Something went wrong. It got kind of salvaged, and it got turned into the RE engine as we know it, so no wonder. But I feel like this game, the way it looks in motion, the way that they do the cinematic blocking, and I don't know what they're doing, but they glow up the in-engine characters into a cinematic cutscene. Like, it's not pre-rendered because your stupid oblong-head character with his mismatched armor bits is in there doing all the fight scenes and all that. But I feel like this is a real manifestation of what they were really shooting for all those years ago when they showed off Deep Down. And yeah, comparing it to Monster Hunter World's campaign, it's like night and day. This is a very cinematic experience. Like I said, it is trying to rope the normies in. It's done that job well because, I fancy myself a normie. I love a good bit of AAA slop entertainment, whatever you want to call it. That's what this is. And it's just bombastic and brilliant and beautiful. And I re-rolled my character into a new one because, honestly, I was so into it in the early hours. It grabbed me so quickly. I wanted to take it more seriously. So I grabbed one of these presets of this 6-foot-tall Icelandic goddess, and I'm running around in bloody armored miniskirts and having a great time with my girl power unit. Actually, it's probably worth pointing out, a lot of the characters are female, and they're all likable. They're all cool. Like, all this nonsense about... It's hard seeing this and not buying into the rhetoric about, Western studios making characters ugly. They're all gorgeous. They're all beautiful, but they're all competent. And the structure from the way the characters interact with each other is, generally speaking, it's brief and it's all objective based, which that's how I live my life. That's how I talk to people. I don't really want to hear about what you did on your weekend. I don't care about your sick grandmother. I don't. And I think a lot of guys are like that, unless maybe I'm just a prick. No one's disrespectful. No one's mean, but everyone's got a job to do. Like, for example, in Avon unit, there's you're the hunter or huntress or whatever. You've got your Palico, your stupid bloody cat, which, by the way, they gave them voice lines now. No, you can turn that off. You can put it back onto cat mode. I highly suggest doing that. I don't want to see them as talking to me with a personality, so mine talk to me in cat. But if you really want it to pretend it's a person, that's a bit, I don't want to cross that line. But that's sort of the hunting core is you two. Then you'll have your sort of sidekick, guild representative, handler, I think they're called. Alma in this case, this chick with glasses, a bit of a bookworm. She's the brains of the operation. She gives you permission to fight monsters as they see fit, which again, to follow another tangent, that's the thing that they flesh out here that I didn't really realize about Monster Hunter. And, not spoiling the story, but you come across people, they don't understand the concept of weapons. And it's never explicitly said, but it sort of opens the gate that the concept of person-on-person violence, I don't think exists in this universe. Like, it's never brought up, which would probably make sense if it doesn't exist. But this idea of fighting and killing the monsters is totally foreign to the people in this land. And even then, you can't just kill things willy-nilly. You sort of need the thumbs up from your guild representative. And it's not about being fun police, it's all about the sanctity of the environment, right? And so if you have these rogue predators going out of control, destroying and unbalancing the ecosystem, the monster hunter's job is to try and balance it out. I mean, look, if you squeeze it too hard, it probably falls apart, but I think it's a really cool and interesting concept that it's more that you're a necessary evil doing a service with a tool as opposed to someone that kills things willy-nilly. But yeah, so Ava's your handler, and then you've got, what's her name, Gemma, the booby blacksmith chick who's a little bit ditzy, but even then she's muted. It's fairly restrained. Any other dev did it, they'd make her insufferable, but she's cool. Actually, while we're at it as well, check her out. She's got this huge head of hair, and she's got the first functional side cut I've ever seen. Everyone knows that a side cut on a chick character in a video game is a red flag, because they're performative. I never really thought about it until I saw this. Like, you just know that it means that person's going to bloody talk to you about which protest they went to on the weekend or whatever, right? It's a performative haircut that's about sending a message. And it never really occurred to me that a side cut could be functional. So this Booberella chick has a huge mop of blonde hair, but on the side where she swings her hammer, and you can see it in her animations, she's, buzzed a bit of the hair off to functionally keep it out of her hair while she does a hard man's job. It's sick. It's cool. And it really puts all this side cut shit to shame. But yeah, that makes up your unit. and you kind of have a sister unit, and the two of you are exploring this area and mapping it and overlapping and working together. So you sort of have a mini hierarchy. You're kind of the one running the show. And Olivia, I think is her name, is the hunter on the other team, and she's really cool as well. One look at her, you think she's a bit of a Karen, but she's not. She's I wouldn't necessarily say she's got a warmth or even that she's stoic, but she's firm and competent. That's the thing. And seemingly, despite all that, fairly approachable. I know I sound like I'm kind of simping for these female characters, but it kind of boggles me that we have this sisterhood of the traveling monster hunters, so many front-running female characters. They're all good looking, and they're all likable, believable, competent, and objective-oriented characters without ever getting on their soapbox and stomping and trauma dumping and telling you about their problems. But there are male characters, she's got a little white cat, which doesn't really feature, but she's got Eric, which is sort of a bit of an apprentice junior, a bit of a very young, inexperienced bloke as her handler. And then Werner is this like spurgaz prick, super brilliant. I think at one point he invented some brilliant wildfire or something like that, and Gemma's like, can you tell me about it? It's like, I can't remember, it's not important, I invented it, I moved on. What's your name again? I don't have room in my head to remember your name. So he creates a bit of conflict, but it's more that he's just the autistic engineer to the nth degree. And then to round out your little traveling troupe of two squads is this kid that you're trying to return back to home, and he's sort of like the window through which you see everything. He is kind of the main character and has probably the most interesting arc, but again, it's not shooting for Academy Award stories or anything like that. And it did make me think about how badly we've been gaslit into like good writing equals a good story. Like, that's not really what's going on here. The story's fine, it's carrot on a stick, and the characters aren't exactly fleshed out super high. It's not like modern BioWare CRPG games where the idea of character development is talking to a side character and having them just dump dialogue of all their childhood on you and you just receive it, and that's called fleshing out a character, just monologuing. No, you pick up tiny little hints of personality from these characters as they interact with you over the course of your journey, and that's it. But that gives them personality, that makes it a troop, and it kind of turns your little fellowship into a character as a whole. Anyway, look, I know I spent a lot of time on that campaign because that's kind of what blindsided me. I wasn't expecting it. It was so much better than what I thought it would be. And yet, like I said, if you pulled it apart and said, well, what is the core story? What is the writing quality of the campaign? I would say it's probably not that great, to be honest. And yet, what an excellent experience that I want everyone to have. It's very wonderful and just cements my position that we just should sack all the writers in video games. But yeah, look, I'll round it out on this as well, graphically. Actually, look, I'll even touch on, I suppose, performance issues. Anecdotally, I didn't have any issues, but I'm running a stupid bloody NASA computer from outer space, right? It's not supposed to be a flex, but it's more about acknowledging where I sit in the food chain. So I'm running a Ryzen 7 9800 X3D. I've got 64 gig of RAM in this bad boy, and I've got a 4070 Ti. If I'm having problems, there's problems, but I wasn't, right? They patched it halfway through the weekend, and that created a bit of a tearing issue, but I just turned on VSync, running this at 4K, max settings. I never dropped below 60 frames. I never had any crashes, anything. However, a lot of people are reviewing that they have issues, right? So be careful, be aware of your hardware. I also think that the recommended settings for this was something wild, like medium at 30 frames. Now, you can be upset about that or whatever, but if that's what they're recommending, and then you go in with your 10-year-old hardware and you have a surprise Pikachu face that this thing won't run for shit, well, I mean, come on, there is warning there. Is it acceptable? Is it right? Like, should it actually run on better hardware? That's a different conversation, and I think that's a very fair question. But just bear in mind that even their recommended settings, as I understand it, are pretty low. So as sympathetic as I am to people having performance issues, it's sort of like, I feel like this game has telegraphed that maybe it's aimed at some pretty Gucci gear from the get-go. So buyer beware going in. For all my bluster and that I've talked up how great this game is, it objectively might not be for you given the gear that you're running at the moment. But when you get into the graphics, like I remarked to a mate of mine that was playing it as well. I remember when you had FX, Hair FX, Witcher 3, whatever the bloody hell it was called. If you turned that on, you'd crash your computer trying to animate each of Geralt's individual hair strands. And this game is just an overload of all those sort of animations, right? There was a section I was walking through. I was wearing like fur armor from head to toe, this bright orange, beautiful stuff. And I was walking through this like tar area and it was getting all muddy and greasy. And then if I rolled, it got all over me. Another point where I was in like a torrential downpour and I had like pink dreads as part of my headpiece, but it all got so wet that it turned like dark red. So it's just amazing seeing all the interactions and the colors. And like I said, it's not strictly graphical fidelity, how I would explain Marvel Spider-Man's, texture beauty and how, well, high fidelity all the textures are. This has more. This feels alive. In fact, again, and I don't really want to shit on Avowed, but a huge problem with Avowed to me is that it felt static. So much of its environment just felt stationary. And while people were quick to point out that a lot of the NPCs didn't move, personally, I noticed the absence of any sort of weather effects, no exaggerated wind or any sort of motion to round out the world. Or if it was there, it was very rare. Whereas this game never stops moving. It feels alive every second of the time that you're with it. Whether it's fluttering sort of glowfly, butterfly things, to all the hair physics I was talking about, to the environmental stuff. You're going to go through sandstorms. I didn't know deserts could look this way. I remember when I played the Mad Max game being blown away at the jump forward in making a desert look beautiful. This is the similar jump forward again. Dust storms, lightning storms, shifting sands, rolling dunes, environments that should be bland and boring, and yet they turn it into this dynamic, beautiful, moving, living background. So yes, if you can run it, this is the best looking game fucking in existence at the moment, and it might not necessarily beat out something like Spider-Man when it comes to the details on the textures of each square inch of the suit, but it all comes together in something more akin to artistic direction. How something like Fortnite can stand the test of time. You don't have to like Fortnite, but its Pixar-like graphics and art direction will outlast a lot of the high-fidelity, hyper-realistic looking stuff. I feel like this is a similar kind of graphical component, having this dynamism, this movement, this action of environment. I don't know what the catchphrase would be for it because it seems to be sort of a burgeoning, not even technology, but a way of approaching the artistic design of an environment and making it feel alive. Anyway, look, these are my main points. Obviously, I'm very fond of the game, but I hope this wasn't just me gushing and it was more that I was able to convey what it is in this game that makes it tick, that makes it great, that makes it appeal to everyone, and makes it kind of the best game in just about every way that you can get your hands on now, whether it's from graphics to onboarding newbies to gameplay depth to longevity in the long game. Yeah, this thing is the real deal. This is the package. Build a new computer, clear a calendar, take a month off sick and dig in. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being and I'll catch you guys on the next one.